And hello everyone, it is Peter Sam, the Narrow Gauge Engine, back again with another video following my video on the best characters from each season. I thought it would be a good look to take at who, in my opinion, the weakest characters are from these same seasons. Some seasons had quite obvious standout characters that were unlikable or just had bad episodes, and some seasons had characters that were just weaker than others around them, causing them to be chosen for the list. With all that said, let's dive on in and see who my picks are for the weakest engines in these glorious seasons. Season 1 has a very limited cast, so I had to think things over when picking this one. In the end, I chose James, as despite him having some strong episodes, his introductory set of 3 episodes were very similar to episodes we had just seen with Thomas's arc. That, along with his general poor attitude and antagonistic personality in a multitude of episodes, made him an easy pick for me, especially when compared to the likes of Thomas and Edward, who were rootable underdogs, Henry and Toby, who you could garner sympathy for due to their various issues within the season, Percy, who was charming in his own right, and Gordon, who was really too iconic to dislike to the same degree. This leaves James as the worst character from the season, in my opinion. Season 2 was not tricky for me at all, as it's very clearly Thomas who is the most problematic this time round. Not only did he have some of the weakest episodes in the season in Thomas and Trevor and Better Late Than Never, but he also acted very poorly in them and was definitely a part of the reason as to why they were received more negatively than the ones like A Close Shave, for example. Surprisingly, Thomas's more likeable moments in this season come from when he isn't in the spotlight. Old Iron, Ghost Train and Woolly Bear all have Thomas in a secondary role, and he feels like a completely different engine to the moody and sardonic one seen when he is the main character. That, along with the fact that the rest of the cast of this season is relatively strong, means he is the worst character of the season for me. When it comes to Season 3, once again, I think it's very tricky, but in the end I decided to hone in on 2 characters. But with the way that they're written, you can't really have one without the other. It'd be unfair to pick one without mentioning the other. I am, of course, talking about Bill and Ben. Now, whilst Heroes is a strong episode, these 2 characters are, in my opinion, one of the weaker aspects, as they are overshadowed by the technical brilliance the episode has to offer, and these 2 go hand in hand with the odd moral aspect, with that being that you should be careful what you wish for. They complain about everything being the same, yet when things changed they made a mess of the yard and the clay pits collapsed. Not the worst moral to come out of a Thomas episode, but definitely a moral that in general I've always had a bit of an issue with. Then there's One Good Turn, which, as we all know, why that one's bad. The childish nonsense, the weird ending, all of it down to how these pair are written and why it's cemented them as the worst characters of the season, in my opinion. Similar to Season 3, Season 4 was tricky. You have to take my picks with the classic seasons with a pinch of salt, because in the end, I did pick Percy, as his 2 episodes were both rather weak, both often being chosen as the weakest in the lineup. Special Attraction is an unsuccessful merging of 2 Chris Awdry stories, and Mind That Bike was a bad Chris Awdry story regardless, so its adaptation never really had much hope. It's not like Percy was an unlikable character in these episodes, but in a season with such likeable characters and such a strong cast, when you have a run like this, it's gonna be noticeable. On to Season 5 now, and for once my pick was considerably easier. Gordon in this season is rather weak. He's only ever really seen as angry and arrogant, with his 2 spotlight episodes being A Better View for Gordon and Gordon and the Gremlin. The first of these has an excellent crash, but that isn't enough to make it all that good when the narrative is painfully mediocre, and we all know what's wrong with Gordon and the Gremlin. The only other 2 notable appearances I can remember from Gordon in this season are in Snow, which has him in a minor, albeit humorous role, and Thomas and the Rumours, which gives us possibly the most pitifully lame crash in all of the classic series. One minor moment right at the back end of the season isn't enough to stop him from being crowned the worst character of the season, in my opinion. Season 6 definitely dumbs down its characters to a degree and still sees characters like Percy and Gordon become more Flanderized, but I don't think there was necessarily as awful as a character as Edward in this season. In his 1 spotlight episode, he was deemed as a back engine, and only a back engine. It seems all of his achievements and other responsibilities of running a branch line got ignored to give him a very underdog story that we've already seen. Not only is Edward the very useful engine unoriginal, but it misunderstands Edward considering he's not really in the rest of the season. He tells a ghost story in Scary Engines, but I don't think that's enough to save him from being attributed as the worst of the season. I could have also chosen Rusty due to his bad episode in Rusty saves the day, but as he's still represented as a maintenance diesel and he's still in character, I decided against it. Due to his lack of presence in this season too, I could have chosen Henry, but I felt like it was a bit too invisible of a pick to be here, so unfortunately Edward has been picked. Season 7 introduces 5 new characters, all with their own distinct personalities and little quips. But the weakest of these, and the weakest one in the season for me, is Murdoch. I'm sorry Murdoch fans, but it has to be said that whilst he does have his moments, they're a lot less present than someone like Fergus, who has 2 spotlight episodes and a secondary role in Salty Stormy Tale. Murdoch gets 1 episode to himself, which allows him to overcome his distaste for the characters of Salty and Harvey, and then has this weird secondary role in Best Dressed Engine, which to be honest, could have been filled by any character really. Edward, Emily, Donald and Douglas, his inclusion to the plot there doesn't really feel like it was written for him specifically, as he hasn't developed enough to the point where it does feel that way. Amongst the beloved old and new characters, I just feel like this poor guy gets lost in the shuffle, and whilst he deserves more, he unfortunately didn't get it. Next up is Season 8, and my pick this time is Toby. Due to the small main cast, it was tougher, but I picked our favourite tram engine because of how his one spotlight episode has him unable to stand up for himself and have him feel sorry for himself, like some sort of victim, when previously he was nothing like that. His character has totally changed here, as has his voice by Michael Angelis, which gives him this more Percy or James vibe that doesn't work with the character at all. It was clear to me that the writers didn't understand Toby's place in the series and went in a completely different direction. You could say the same about the characters like Henry, but due to the fact there was still his love of nature as part of his personality, that at least puts him somewhat above Toby in my opinion, making the number 7 engine the worst character of the season. Season 9 is another one with a big cast and made up of some new characters, and unlike with Season 7 before it, these ones are a lot weaker due to their lack of presence and time in the spotlight, essentially acting as plot devices. In the end, it came down to Molly and Neville, and since I think Thomas and the New Engine is such a strong episode in comparison to Molly's special, I chose Molly as the weakest character from this season. What is there to say about her other than she's nice and an underdog? Coming from a show full of characters with these traits, it's no wonder why she's my pick for this season as the weakest. She has a good design though, I'll give her that. Season 10 is home to 2 really bad narrow gauge episodes in my opinion, those being Wolf and Peace and Duncan Drops the Clanger, with the former of these being placed as the worst Hit Era episode in my opinion. Similarly, I'll be picking the protagonist from that episode in Scari as the worst character from the season. Now to be fair, this isn't a season where Scari is atrociously bad. Thomas and Scari's Big Day Out is a good example of Scari not being characterised horrendously, but then there's Wolf and Peace, which as I said is awful, making Scari into a timid child who is afraid of pretty much just everything, even though he's supposed to be this sage, confident, strong-willed character. It's like he's regressed into his personality from very old engines. Fearless Freddy also has this issue, but he's become childish in the sense of his energetic and buoyant glee at being able to race an engine, making him and Rheneas the 2 weakest parts of the episode. There are probably some other moments in the season that I missed, so feel free to mention them down below, but it's all of that cements him as the worst character in the season for me. I don't think people realise how bad Thomas really was in season 11. In terms of the Great Discovery, the special following this season, he was amazing, but in this season, he really was so weak due to just how repetitive the plots he was involved in became. Thomas and the Lighthouse, Smoke and Mirrors, Thomas Set Sail, Thomas in Trouble, Hide and Peep, Thomas and the Big Bang, and Thomas and the Runaway Car being prime examples. The first 2 I had tied as the weakest of the season when doing my rankings for it, and the final pick of Runaway Car I had high due to pretty much everything but him. Now, as he is prominent, he does have his moments. Hector the Horrid is a great example of a well-written Thomas, but they are so few and far between that it's painful. Actually, that's also a good point. How this season is structured in general is a piece of piss, and I'm so glad the Unlucky Tug brought it up in his Season 11 retrospective, because now I don't feel alone in saying how bad this season is. But after the deluge of decent episodes that show promise out the gate, we have back-to-back Thomas and the Lighthouse, Smoke and Mirrors, Thomas and the Big Bang, Thomas and Set Sail, and Don't Be Silly Billy, which is yet another episode where I have issues with Thomas as an overbearing arsehole. That is absolute pain, and is part of this reason as to why Thomas is the worst character of the season for me. We finished the Hit Era with Season 12, and I feel like I can finally pick Henry here as the worst character because in his one spotlight episode, Henry gets it wrong, all common sense flies out the window and he acts like a brain-dead moron. His characterisation is so far removed from anything I've seen of him prior to this and makes for such an unenjoyable watch. Now yes, I could have chosen a newbie from this season because they're shit too, and just plot devices really, but to be honest, I really did want to touch on Hit Error Henry at some point, and I feel as though if I picked one newbie to feature on this list, I'd really just have to pick them all at the same time. Hank, Colin and Flora are all just as bad as each other really. If I did have to pick one just to satiate you, Henry stands out there, I'd say Colin, because in reality the party surprise in general could have just had the characters of Colin and Freddie replaced by Cranky and Salty, and it just would have been so much more powerful. But yeah, Henry's worse for me, just because of how idiotic he's become in that episode. We're in the Brenner era now, because seasons 13 and 16 can go burn in hell. My pick for the worst character of Brenner's first season, season 17, is undoubtedly Caitlyn. Her spotlight episode, Calm Down Caitlyn, makes her seem like a dim-witted and overzealous character full of traits that I don't like. She's inconsiderate, boisterous, needy, quite energetic, which all amalgamate into someone who I personally just would want to stay away from. This season really does have some weak characters, but I'd sooner take the Blander Scruff and the Dowdy Stafford over her, because there's a level of groundedness that comes with them, which I can appreciate. With Caitlyn, I just want to throw her down a mountain. Now it's time for season 18, and to all of you James fans out there, I'm sorry, but it is James for me. He has 3 spotlight episodes in this season, and whilst Toad's adventure isn't exactly an awful depiction, the other 2 episodes are. In Duck and the Slip Coaches, he steals Duck's idea and takes all the credit, which is next level selfish, and in Duck in the Water, he is ignorant, pompous, and overall, all of his negative qualities have been dialed up to an extent that I find hard to deal with. This pick might have been swayed if we got an episode this season that presents James as not a dick, but that didn't happen, and so he's my pick for the worst of the worst when it comes to this season, because of how demoralising it is to watch him on screen. My pick for season 19 is another pick that I've chosen before, and it's Bill and Ben. Now I was really close to picking them for season 18, but I figured that James's horrible nature in that season was more prevalent than theirs, and due to No Help at All being another horrible Bill and Ben episode where they're just the worst the whole way through, but it's a season 19 episode means that I could just pick them here. My problems with Bill and Ben in this season are problems that feature all throughout the era, aside from season 17. They're rude, manipulative, snide, and just downright cold. They don't care, and that's the root of the problem. The only time you'll see them really give a damn is when it's them that's on the line, and they never change and they never grow from it. They just remain in their evil little bubbles, and what's worse is I don't think that they're actively doing it to be horrible. That's just how they are. It's engraved in their machinery, and so no, they won't change, and Timothy is left to suffer forever. What a sickening thought. Anyway, they suck. Let's move on. My pick for season 20 is a Brenner era character who, surprisingly, I haven't really spoken about much in detail, but someone who is rather disliked by the fans, and that is Samson. Once again, it more so comes down to the fact that there is such a large cast, most of whom aren't that irritating. Even Bradford was somewhat more entertaining than him, despite being in less episodes. And that's all because Samson has similar traits to Caitlyn, with his obnoxious superiority complex and lack of common sense. It just makes for characters that are unlikable and unrootable, as opposed to the humorous effect that I think the crew thought it would provide. Yeah, the only thing that's remotely good about this bloke is his basis. Aside from that, he is just all kinds of flawed. As Victoria Justice would say, here I am, once again. Ah, fuck, just hurt myself. The last season to cover. Season 21, and similarly we're going for a new character, and for me the worst character of the season is Carly. Not like Carly, I know I just mentioned another Nickelodeon, it's fine. I definitely did consider Hannah for a while, but after giving it some thought, her link to Henrietta makes her slightly more interesting. Carly is just annoying. In the episode New Crane on the Dock, we see things from Cranky's perspective as the protagonist, so seeing his frustration at Carly also makes me frustrated at her. As well as this, there's just a lack of teamwork between the pair that makes them both unlikable to a certain extent, and therefore Carly just comes off in the complete wrong way. Also, her accent just sort of goes through me quite a bit. All of that makes her the worst character of the season for me. So that's it. Those are my picks for the worst character from each season of Thomas and Friends, the ones that matter anyway. Of course, some all-time bad characters like Billy or Hit Error Edward did not find their way onto the list, and that's mostly because other characters had more bad moments across that season than them. But as we know, there's also good characters in every single season, those who stand out for their stronger and more impactful moments. And if you want to see my picks for the best character from every season we've spoken about today, there is a video already up on the channel discussing that topic. But until next time, I've been Peter Sam, you've been you, and I'm just glad I was never in a position to put myself on the list. Thank God.